we've counted 9 separate problems, all of which affect Chelsea in every game that they play. And those problems could see Pochettino failing wholeheartedly. Team selection, over-reliance and leadership are only some of the problems that we're going to have a look at. Let's kick off with team selection, because Chelsea have used 23 different players this season, but not a single one has featured in every single Premier League game for them. So for added context, only 3 players have actually started 20 or more matches so far this season for Chelsea. The team selection, it's 2 things. It's inconsistent, and it's a word that I don't think I really ever heard when it came to football until Chelsea started spending all their money, and it's even on the field itself, scattergun. But it doesn't stop there either, because with the team frequently being chopped and changed all the time, you'd think that the formation would be altered in relation to the different players being used. But no, Chelsea have actually only used 2 formations. For the first 5 games of the season, it was a 3-4-3, and then they've moved to a 4-2-3-1 for the rest of it. And since they deployed the 4-2-3-1 week in, week out, whilst the personnel within the formation changes all the time, that's 26 matches on the bounce, starting 4-2-3-1 with so many different players. And so this brings us on to the next problem, which is 2 problems that perpetuate each other. Because the first problem is an off-the-field issue, which is now not only hampering the starting lineup, but also means that Pochettino has one hand tied behind his back when it comes to team selection. And that, yeah, you saw this one coming obviously as an issue, recruitment. Now, what do we mean by this? So this team sheet here shows the problem. Let's break it down, because firstly, the 200 million that you spent on Fernandes, of course, and Caicedo, that means that Chelsea are forced to play them together in midfield pretty regardless of form, let's be honest. Look, they're both great players and you're expecting more from them, but you can't even take them out because you spent that much on them. So to leave them on the bench just feels wild, doesn't it? Meanwhile, you got someone like Conor Gallagher, who's playing that little bit higher forward. Now, he's been Chelsea's most reliable player this season and the player who has started the most games for them in the league. He's playing further forward, I think, than you would possibly put him. I mean, he could be pressing forward in a lesser side, but even a lesser side is someone who can get all around the pitch. And him sort of playing in that half space is just not really him. So whilst he's decent, he's never going to register the creative numbers that you'd want your attacking midfielder in a team that's cost as much as this. Gallagher is only averaging 1.39 key passes per 90, which is only the 6th highest in the Chelsea squad. This is evident in other areas as well. When Chelsea want to play Madueke, they're going to bring him in. But someone like Palmer, you can't not play Palmer. So Palmer's got to play. And Nkunku, of course, has been injured a lot of the time. And you've therefore seen Palmer play as a centre forward. But this is crazy, isn't it? It's crazy to think that you've got your best player of the whole season and you're going to have to play him out of position because you've over-recruited in certain positions whilst clinically under-recruiting in others. Which leads to a really important point in my mind. Are Chelsea forcing it that little bit too much? Madueke has played 11 times in the Premier League this season, yet only has 3.4 90s under his belt. So when they do decide to play him, he's got no match sharpness. Players who make mistakes or underperform are also frequently chopped and changed. Then you add in the fact that these are young players. This is a problem that they're then going to get crucified for their mistakes rather than being given the chance to rectify them because it's just 1 or 2 youngsters. But as we alluded to, this comes back to recruitment in a way nobody at Chelsea probably anticipated. Chelsea acquired 12 players over the summer, costing a total of 400 million quid. Do you know how much this blows my mind as a QPR fan? At least you're not doing well at the moment. But there is a caveat in all of this because you've spent 400 million, sure, but the average age of these 12 players was 21 years old, meaning that Chelsea effectively spent millions on players deemed as long-term investments, and whilst making a huge oversight in the process. In the current football market, players are only appreciating assets if they not only develop, but also put in consistent performances that consolidate the initial outlay that you've spent. And as soon as you don't, you drop down in price. The strategy, in theory, was to develop these players into assets that were worth way more than they spent on them. However, the execution of this has been criminally bad. One example has to be the Madueke and Palmer situation. They cost a total of 75 million between the two of them. And to bring in both of them to play on the right wing, both of them are left-footed, both of them like to cut in, and both of them are 21 years old. So how are you supposed to develop both of these guys at once? It makes absolutely no sense. And the evidence shown is that Madueke is suffering from this exact thing. But he's not the only one. Ian Matson, Levi Colwill, Romeo Lavia, who I know has been injured, but still, Carney Chukwuemeka, Armando Broja, who was so great at Southampton, now struggling in this Chelsea side, and of course Mudryk are just some of the players that could have been affected by this. So don't expect this issue to be resolved anytime soon. Chelsea have always been known to produce excellent academy players, but also great representatives of the clubs and the proper Chelsea aspect of Chelsea. And it's given them that rigidity and personality as a club, despite at times not being the darlings of the league. But apart from Conor Gallagher, who's not even being played in its correct position, there aren't any academy graduates left that are being given a fair crack of the whip. These young, expensive signings, they're not only gambles, but they also close off any avenues to the first team for the academy players. These academy players that are probably good enough to fulfill the B-side roles these multi-million-pound acquisitions are being forced to do aren't getting the chance. In times where the club's identity is at risk, you need a captain who understands the club. He brings the identity from the stands onto the pitch. So when your captain is then constantly injured, it has to impact on how these young players perform. There is no backboard to the team. Reece James has only started 19 Premier League games in 2 years, which is obviously heartbreaking. And I think an element of bad luck when it comes to wanting your captain to go and be that, but he was appointed captain at the start of the season. Vice captain is Chilwell's obviously constantly having problems with injuries as well. Thiago Silva obviously is a captain and he's there if you need him. But in terms of the forefront of the team and moving the team forward, the captains aren't there. Name me another club with a captain who is always unavailable. It's pointless. Now let's have a look at the tactical problems, because this is, I think, where Pochettino comes under fire. And look, recruitment is not his fault. It's not his issue. But these issues here are his. And you'll see actually from this image that this is the key to all of it, really. The Luton game, let's start here. Second goal for Luton in this one. And it's about the body position of the defenders, and with that it kind of tells us about knowing what you're doing, but maybe being informed on what you should be doing, and also kind of working as a team, and also taking accountability as well. So the two players, of course, you've got Ogbeni over here, who's about to put a cross in for the second goal, but I want to focus on the two midfielders more than anyone. Badiashile is there in front of them as well. Those two, their body language is closed, and in terms of where they're looking, they're both keeping an eye on the cross coming in. They're not dealing with what is the actual danger for them, which is Ross Barkley or any other runners. Those are the players that they need to deal with. And they're not doing it. They're closed. They're just watching the ball. And the ball watching leads to, a very simple goal. You're not going to be surprised by this at all, because this is how Luton play. You move it on one. It's a simple cross to the back post, and they are utterly at sea. And they were able to score from the back post here. And if we know anything about Luton this season, is one, they're going to cross the ball a lot. Two, they're going to load the back post and load bodies into the box. So if we go back to that one, it feels like only a little thing, but it does lead to a goal. They have to have the open body language to see who's on their way, because someone will inevitably be on their way. And if they don't know that, then that's outrageous. They have to know that. Having no idea what's behind you is, it's just not acceptable. And what is behind them? Yeah, that's right. You've got an unmarked player for Luton. Doughty gets absolutely loads of space, gets a solid connection, and then Adebayo follows up as well. So it's just about not being alive. Here's another goal that they conceded against Wolves. And again, it's about kind of knowing what you're doing as a team. So João Gomez, forgive me, is over here out wide. Now, the overall setup through the middle feels pretty calm and sorted out, if you know what I mean. But Hugo Bueno here is pointing to this area here. He's kind of doing that because, I'm not trying to get at Conor Gallagher because he's been really important to them, but Conor Gallagher has kind of tried to cut out this passing lane. And he's made up Bueno's mind for him, and it therefore leaves all this space. And what it does to Cole Palmer as well, it makes it a nightmare for him, who's already actually squared up Gomez. He's kind of done his job to sort of slow him down. But it leaves that massive space in behind, and you'll be ready to see what happens next. Of course, that's exactly what happens. If Conor Gallagher, if we move back, if he just holds or understands the run there, they're not as easy to break down. It's not as soft defensively. They're harder to play against. And it does seem to be, I don't know if it's a moment of motivation or just an overall head loss here when it comes to Chelsea as a team, but games against teams that have those runners, and especially teams, mid-table teams, let's think Bournemouth, Wolves, Nottingham Forest, Newcastle, you could chuck them in there obviously with all the injuries that they've had. Those teams that have runners, Chelsea don't seem to have the organisation, kind of the desire to stick with their men and be aware when those players go there and make those runs. And this all comes down to communication, because that's the other thing, I think, be it Pochettino to the players themselves. But again, if we come back to it, as a back three or back four, and this would have been, I presume, a back four that they're playing in this one, again, who is taking accountability? He should be barking and stopping that happening, or he should be ready to make that run because he knows that Conor Gallagher is going to make that pressing run. But instead, no one knows what they're doing, and then they're in trouble. Now, there was a little Easter egg in that little bit of tactical analysis from me boy Jimbo. Did you notice what all of these goals had in common apart from them switching off? Well, they all happened in the last 10 minutes of matches. Have a look at this. Chelsea have conceded 13 goals between the 76th and 90th minute this season, which is more than any other part of the match. They switch off. So much so that there were 10 more examples that we could have shown you of this happening. And again, in terms of switching off, not being at it, in terms of those three key zones of when Chelsea concede, it's at the start of the game, it's just after the second half starting, and it's right at the end of the game. That's a problem. In terms of struggling against specific teams, I alluded to it earlier, but there are actually two types of teams in which Chelsea struggle with, and the difference between both sets of teams is fascinating, and this image here shows the key. Now, firstly, there's a clear trend over the teams that they beat and the teams that beat them. So work your way down from Chelsea in the table, and the results are pretty positive generally, but when you start to look up the table, you see that they massively struggle against teams above them in the league. The takeaway here is that they struggle against their competitors. Now, several reasons impact this. Quality of opponent being higher, the higher you go in the league, of course, their approach is generally more bulletproof, meaning the goals are harder to come by, and therefore you're going to be punished when those chances happen, and it shows. Chelsea have conceded at least one goal against every team above them in the table this season, but I think what's really interesting is that actually they've gone and got points against those top teams at times. Yes, of course, they've got pumped by Liverpool as well. They've been able to get impressive draws against Liverpool, Man City, Arsenal. So that, again, turns me towards a motivation, confidence, strength of character element in this. And that, again, that could come from youth as much as anything. But there's one particular style of team that they struggle the most against, and that is teams with runners. Wolves, Brentford, Liverpool and Newcastle have had their number this season, especially in that second game for Liverpool. And that's because Chelsea simply couldn't cope with the fast-paced attacks delivered by the other teams once they won possession. Which, if you want to go after Pochettino, and I think there is grounds for it, it points towards a lack of plan when it comes to regrouping, which again could possibly come back to motivation. Or is that on Poch? That has to be on Poch a little bit. There's not more, is there? There is more. Could the problem with regrouping be down to a tempo problem? Well, Chelsea average around 4.41 passes per sequence of possession. This is the fourth highest in the Premier League, and it's just slightly beneath Arsenal. So, if they're up there with Arsenal, what's the problem, Jim? Well, it's a problem because Chelsea's passing sequences, they sort of lack any clear intent. So this next image is from the match against Wolves. It shows it perfectly because this shows where the ball was played when Chelsea had possession. And there are three problems with it. Firstly, it's two side to side, meaning that not many penetrative passes get played. Secondly, for a team trying to dominate the ball, pretty much all of their players' average positions are in the middle third, making it easy for Wolves to squeeze them. And therefore, there's no outball whatsoever. And lastly, look at Nkunku. Completely isolated. He only had 3 touches in the box all game. The tempo issue also affects them when it comes to their attacking prowess. I've highlighted 4 teams here because the difference between Chelsea and the other 3 is very poor. Now, I want you to look at the amount of key passes in total Chelsea had made this season. 218. This puts them 9th in the league, which is by definition pretty average, right? But then look at the stat to the right. This is the amount of passes played into the final third of the pitch. Chelsea have made 165 more passes into the final third than Newcastle, 52 more than Man United and 66 more than Aston Villa. Yet their key pass total is less. This again numerically shows they struggle to make things happen once they progress the ball, and this next freeze frame from the game against Liverpool recently shows it perfectly. Chelsea have made their way into the final third. Hooray! But what is Madueke supposed to do with it? Madueke has the ball here, as you can see. What's he supposed to do? Let's have a little look. You know, in terms of passing, okay, you can play it to him, but he's literally not even looking at you, to be honest. You know, he's not ready to receive the ball. And if he gets it, he's got to go down here. He's not much is going to happen there. Can he dribble himself? I mean, he can, but again, he's safe. Can he put, no. Can he, no. Could he? No. Is there any way you get... And I know what you're thinking. No. It's just not going to happen. There's just no options for him at all. There's nobody showing for the ball on the inside. All the passing lanes to the centre are cut off because of this. Therefore, the only option is to try and play the ball forward to Axel Disasi, who isn't a world beater at right back to begin with. But this pass is so telegraphed by Virgil van Dijk, it already has it covered. So therefore, the play is going to break down. Are you Poch in or Poch out? Let me know.